Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to our expert table, Taking Action with OKRs. My name is Veronica. It's my honor and privilege to be your host today. While we wait for everyone else to settle in to their virtual seats, I want to invite everyone who is interested in connecting to share their LinkedIn profile in the chat. And that way we can stay in touch after this webinar as well. If you don't have access to the chat, I will make sure to address that in just a few minutes.
Okay, yeah, it says still the chat shows host disabled attendee chat in the questions, Scott is saying. So there's something in your host settings.
Yeah, I'll see what the issue with the settings is in just a moment. Okay. So today we have invited 4 OKR experts who will help us understand what on earth are OKRs, why should we care, how do we take advantage of them, and they will get into a bit more details on how to measure them and what mistakes to look out for, things that they may have experienced through their own personal practice. So in no specific order, first, I'm going to introduce our Kanbanize Italy partner, David Bramini. David is the founder of O-nami, a consulting business through which he applies his 30 plus years of consulting experience to help companies satisfy their customers through principles and practices of business agility. Joining him is his O-nami colleague, Gianluca Gambatesa. Together, they support companies whose business includes knowledge-intensive activities in the software industry, product engineering, manufacturing, and services of any kind to achieve real change. We also have our partner, Mathias Tölken, co-founder and COO of Xuviate, based in Germany and South Africa. Using his 30 plus years of experience, Mathias and his partner, Mark, found Xuviate about 8 years ago, where they focus exclusively on helping businesses around the world survive and thrive in these turbulent times that we live in. In recent years, Mathias' special focus has been on online Kanban training, coaching, and mentoring of leaders and change agents. Last, but most definitely not least, we have our partner, Robert Falkowitz. Hello, Robert, who is based in Switzerland, also has teams in Japan, Germany, the US, Shanghai. He's well-traveled. Robert is the general manager of Concentric Circle Consulting, a consultancy with 30 plus years of experience in Kanban, lean, and service management, coaching, and tool integration, especially in the areas of managing services and optimizing the flow of work. Now, I don't know how good your math is, but we have about a century's worth of combined experience in company management and consulting here. So I don't joke when I say that we have an expert table. Now, before I pass the stage to our wonderful partners, there's a few things that I want to say so you can navigate this webinar more easily. There is a closed captions option that you should see somewhere in the bottom of your screen so that you can have a live transcript for those of you that would find that useful. If you have questions for our panel, please use the Q&A button to post them so that we can see and address them. And I would ask all of you to use the upvote feature so that we can do something of a lean coffee style selection of the best questions and address those, because we certainly will not have time to address all of them, unfortunately. And rest assured, the recording will be made available, so you'll be able to watch this webinar afterwards. And without further ado, I will hand over the stage to our wonderful panel and let them take it away with the first question. The first burning question is, are OKRs agile?
Veronica, I actually would like you, I think you've got a poll there, just to find out what does actually the audience think of this?
You are correct. Of course, I have a poll. I am launching it right now. It's very easy, multiple choice. Do you think, in your own opinion, that OKRs are agile? Definitely, somewhat. No, they're not. I don't know. It's okay not to know. Just let us know if you don't know. So I see so far that definitely is taking the lead, which is awesome. 67% of you think that they are definitely agile, which is interesting. Okay, perfect. I will leave this open for a little bit longer. 80% of you have participated, so thank you. You guys are awesome. But yes, panel, definitely. Our audience, the majority of our audience think that OKRs are definitely agile.
Awesome. If I may say a few words to that one, is this is a very trick question, actually, because the history of OKRs is that Andy Grove first defined that term in 1983. The Agile Manifesto was written in 2000 or 2001. So by definition, OKRs are not agile. Cannot be, because agile, they exist longer than agile. But they have really become sexy in the last few years. First in Google, which was also not agile as such. There was more in the lean thinking and lean startup later on, and then going into agile. But with that, I'm not saying that they are not very, very much like hand in glove to Kanban, to the agile thinking. And I think there I want to leave it from the history books.
You know, if you think in terms of an OKR as, on the one hand, you've got an objective, you've got your key results that you've defined, you've figured out how to measure them, and so on and so forth. And then on the other hand, you've got the methods by which you use OKRs for the management of your organization. I would say that agility belongs on this side. It's how you're managing. It's not something that's inherent in the OKRs themselves.
Love your answers. It's really context dependent, as Robert was saying, because it finds its space in an agile organization, but you can't bring agility simply with bringing OKR to an organization. So it really depends on the context, and for sure, in an agile organization, they fit perfectly.
Okay, so I'm not surprised by the result of the poll, because of looking at OKRs, you can easily recognize some agile features. Let me say short iterations, feedback loops, and 63%. And also OKRs promote many agile values: transparency, simplicity. What else? Self-organizations, focus on aligning people. But obviously, if you change the way of defining your objectives, but you don't change the way how to achieve them, nothing changes. For example, in our experience, if you use an approach to OKRs too strong, too much top or down oriented, so you miss the spirit of OKRs, so you cannot speak about agility anymore.
Let me give you an example from my experience. I've been working with a pharmaceutical company, for example, and a lot of the teams I've been working with are involved in doing clinical trials. Now, a clinical trial can last for years. So if you set up your OKRs so that your objectives are measured over the course of the whole clinical trial, it might be 3 years before you have any data. And of course, everything's going to change in the interim. So that's anything but agile. So if you use them differently by reducing the size of what you measure, being able to get those measurements back more quickly and do a turnaround and acting on them, then we're talking about using them in an agile way. And so this would be why I would distinguish between the OKRs themselves and how you use them.
Yeah, I think also that's a very, very important one, Robert, that you've got there. And that is also where a lot of people in the Agile field, or generally also looking at OKR and saying, and I think Flight Levels also brings in very explicitly and brings it in OKRA, where you bring an action to it. And because the OKR in itself is just an objective that has got a key result that gets measured somewhere. But how you act on it, as you say, it is that thing. And I love a sentence that that Dimitar Karavanov coined, and that is OKR can be used as a gateway drug for Kanban. So they can really be used as the management overview and so on, and the trigger to bring it in and to also measure and to see how you work with agility. But again, how do you use it? If you start using it as a measure which you put, for example, the pay of your employees onto it, and like with commission or whatsoever, then it won't be agile. It will be killing everything that you want. So it is, Robert, as you said, how do you use it?
And following up on that, Matthias, not only do you have the OKRs themselves, the actions that you perform on the basis of them, but you have to complete the whole plan, do, check, act cycle. And say, you've performed the actions, now you need to redo the measurements, replan what you're going to do, and on and on and on. And now you're talking agile.
And I think there's one big thing with OKRs is the cadences. And that's where OKRs, again, come very, very nicely in with Kanban, with the Kanban cadences, where you say, I've got my strategy review, which happens now and then. There, I'm really setting the OKRs. Then I've got my operations review. Then I've got my team reviews, and sometimes even down to the dailies, where I say, whatever I do, or the replenishment, whatever I do next, how does it pay back into my OKRs? So they can be meshed in quite nicely. And you don't have to, with OKRs, they also have cadences, but they don't have to be different meetings. They can be the same meeting, just used in a different way.
They invite you to have different conversation, more focus on your success and how to achieve it. And this is something that changes really the game. Because it's so common sensely that sometimes organizations don't do it. So it's like a common sense revolution.
By focusing on the outcomes, of course, we become particularly customer focused. And by being particularly customer focused, we're forced, if we're going to succeed, to be able to adapt to that constantly changing stream of what the customers want, how the marketplace is responding to those customers' needs. And so that concept of the outcome and measuring the outcome becomes a key aspect of the agility of using OKRs.
Veronica, you are muted.
Of course I am muted. Of course.
We have to say that at least once in this webinar. Somebody is muted.
We all are waiting for the second question.
My mom always used to say, I wish you had a mute button. Well, here it is. I will transition us to our next question, which we want to discuss. How do we get started now that we know that OKRs are agile? What do we do? Where do we even begin?
For me, you start with what you're doing now. So every organization is at some level measuring what they're doing, defining what it is that they want to achieve, fixing some sort of objectives, okay? But they might not be focused on doing this in an agile way. They might not be focused on the customer and the outcomes you want to achieve. They might be internally focused, and they might be looking at measuring things in terms of, all right, we planned to do the following project, and we've done it on time, within budget. Well, that's anything but agile. Okay, it's not making good use of OKRs in an agile context. Another organization might have a very different approach, might have a different level of maturity. And so we have to look at where are you now as a starting point. And then we go on from that to the various implementation steps.
But I think it is very important that what you say, Robert, start with where you now. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. And it's not mistakes, because it's the measurements you've got now, put them in there and work with that, and don't wait for the perfect time. Like we're not doing, it's the same thing we're saying with Kanban. Don't redesign your entire system. Visualize your system. Visualize what you now measure. Obviously, learn more about OKRs. Learn them what they do, how they go, and then you get better and better with that. And I like the term that people are saying with OKRs. Most people want to do these moonshots, these big things that are out there, and everybody says, "Oh, if we're more than 70%, we haven't been ambitious enough," which often been said with OKRs. But there is another term that's often used as a rooftop. So you've got the moonshots, you shoot for them, those big ones, and then you've got the rooftops, the close ones, which you also put in there, which are okay to get at 100%, but those are the ones, and often you start with those. You just start saying, what is it that we already have? What is it that we already measure? And then you take that, and then over time learn and really look at where you want to go. But one thing that's very important there, don't focus on the work that you do. It's always outcomes. So it's not, we want to do this and we have to employ a person or whatsoever. That's not an outcome. It's the outcome you want to achieve. And then how do you measure it? And the action might be we have to employ a person. So there is a bit of thinking in it, and you might need a bit of help from somebody for the first round or two, things like that. But it is like that.
Yes. Yes, I agree. In our experience, just for sure, it is important to introducing OKRs a little bit at a time. Don't introduce a too strong threshold in the organization. Every case, our experience is it's good to get right into this topic. Yes, start with what we are doing now and speak about OKRs. Because we try to stimulating the right conversation about this topic, and when people realize the danger of doing things without a continuous attention to objectives, so I think something is changing in the organizations. Our approach is based on raising ambiguity. I don't know, Gianluca, maybe
yes.
We share our time because we are the same company.
We are talking a lot about conversation during this webinar because it's really, this is the point, because there are lots of organizations that have projects, activities on the table, but there's not so much information shared. So first of all, you need to start from where you are, but paying attention to what's on the table and trying to understand if you are able to put all the information together so that you can have less ambiguity and less uncertainty, because no one knows everything inside the organization. And another thing related to the process that we follow is inviting people to talk about the life cycle of the things that they are working on. This is another step where usually we don't find a consensus from the first conversation because people need to share. And so we think that OKR, as Mathias was saying, change the conversation because you talk about what does it mean for your team, for your organization, achieving success. This is a question that people don't so often share because really you are working hard daily. Your colleagues are doing the same, but you haven't found a common language to understand what does it mean to be successful. And as Robert was saying, you find yourself talking about the activities. We have done all the activities, so we have achieved our objective. It's not true. It's the real mistake that people tend to do when the OKR philosophy is not already inside the organization. So the first thing is start from where you are and try to move the conversation from making activities to achieving success intended as you need to find the right question to invite people to share their point of view and understand what they mean for success and be successful.
Yes, and this topic is very often missing in the conversation.
So it's a process not only of communicating the right information to the right people at the right time, but then there's also a process of gradual alignment of the different entities within the organization. So you might start off in a more traditional organization, for example, they might start off in a very top-down sort of way, okay? Top level in the organization says we've fixed these goals for the organization and we want everybody to align their activities to meet these goals, okay? That's one way of starting. It depends what the culture of the organization is. Other organizations might have teams that are very self-organizing, that have already a culture of understanding in a very lean way what are their suppliers, who are their customers, and you need to be able to define the goals and the objectives for those teams for their local customers, and then align that with the overall goals and objectives of the organization, of the enterprise. And that conversation that's necessary, as David was saying, has got to be part of a process towards gradual and agile and constantly changing alignment.
And maybe to add something, Robert, the experiment that you start doing in your organization must be visible, because sometimes, you know, you have a division that starts with the OKRs, while the others don't know that something is being experimented in your organization. Sometimes it's a good way, starting from where you are, trying to involve everyone in your organization. Say, you know, we are experimenting with this thing. Otherwise, you can achieve success with your work with OKRs without sharing with colleagues and other divisions. And this is a missed opportunity, really.
Yeah, I think it's Robert, when you just now said knowing the services, also I heard knowing the services, because that's very much also in line with the Kanban lens, where you're really looking at seeing work as flow from a need to the need met, and the whole network of services that you've got in your company, and you need to over time start to understand that. And it's also not something that happens overnight. But one thing for me, that is always the one thing that I say for Kanban, is that seeing work differently. Once you see it differently, you cannot unsee it. And that has been for me the biggest change. And with that comes also a lot in that direction. But if I'm looking at that getting started, one last thing there, I know that when you guys initially said, what are the questions you've got? There were a few questions that said, how do I get started in Kanbanize? And we had a bit of a chat beforehand and said, as this is a panel discussion, we don't really have that in here. But I think we have, Veronica, you guys have got such awesome resources in Kanbanize, and Veronica has just put the link there. The one is more, how do you do OKRs in Kanbanize? And the other one is OKR resources. What is OKRs? Some books, some references, some bit of background and so on. A lot of what we talked about, but it is like that.
And maybe we should also mention that we just yesterday had a webinar where the keynote speaker was our CEO, Dimitar, and he talked extensively about how to set up OKRs in Kanbanize and did a whole walkthrough. So once that recording is available, it'll be available on YouTube. So that's another resource that you can refer to. And there will be more to come. So rest assured, no one will be left not knowing how to do it in Kanbanize. And we're always available if you have further questions. I'm going to take this opportunity to ask the panel, would you be interested in knowing what challenges our audience has faced when they've tried to measure OKRs, and as we begin the discussion? Yes, Robert says yes. So I always listen to Robert. Okay, I am launching. Good things come when I listen to Robert. Okay, I am launching a question. What challenges have you faced with OKR measurements? Launching now. It's an open-ended question, so we welcome all kinds of responses. I will keep this open for a little bit to give everyone a moment to gather their thoughts. Thank you for responding. But expert table, what would you say are some good do's and don'ts? Because based on the registration questions that we had, people wanted to know what to do and what not to do. What are some examples, something that you've seen? How do we not repeat mistakes? And how do we use the best practices that you could recommend?
Let me give you a classic example. Okay. An organization has a very important customer support function. Okay? So they've got a bunch of people there, and the customers call up or write or whatever with their problems, with their questions, and they need to get some kind of support. So the organization says, well, this is a very important part of our business. We want to keep our customers satisfied throughout the life cycle of their relationship with us. So we really need to focus on improving our customer service and our support function. Okay, so we've got some type of goal that has been enunciated. We now need to say, how are we going to decide, how are we going to measure if we are giving good service? Okay, so up until there, it all looks pretty good. But then there was the organization that said, well, what customers want is fast, authoritative answers. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure the amount of time it takes to respond to a customer. They call up, how long is the call? Okay, and the shorter the call, the better. So they fix a goal and they say, we want 80% of our calls to last no longer than 3 minutes. And if we can achieve that goal, why, we'll be great in the area of providing customer services. So what happens? You've told the people doing support they're going to be measured on the basis of how long the calls are. And you can be sure that those calls are going to last no more than 3 minutes because that's what you told them is important. Okay? But of course, what happens is they contrive ways of making the calls short without really answering the customers. They'll say, okay, I've noted it down. I'll call you back. 2 minutes. Great, great. They call back and they say, we're still working on it. 30 seconds. Great. But nobody's providing the kind of outcomes that the customers are looking for. So how do we do that? How do we need to adjust that? Well, normally one key result is not sufficient. So we need to balance that key result against another kind of key result. All right. So maybe we need to have the length of the call. Okay, that's good. Shorter is better, all things being equal. But maybe we also need to ask the customers, what is their level of satisfaction? Maybe need to count how many times tickets get reopened. That's another measurement. Okay. Or another example. You fix a goal of reducing the cycle time for doing a certain type of work. The faster we can deliver value to the customers, the shorter the time to market, the better. Okay, that's great. Okay. But what happens if the way in which we reduce time to market is by putting a huge amount of pressure on the employees and they have to work extra hours to get the work done? They've met the measurement. but at the expense of being dissatisfied in their work, at the expense of burnout, at the expense of high turnover in the company. So we need to balance it out with other types of measurements. So we can't depend on just one measurement. We typically have to find a set of balanced measurements that we are going to use as the key results.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. That's awesome. I think that is a very important one, and we often say start with the power of three, in the sense of have 3 outcomes per team or whatsoever, not more. They normally say 3 to 5, but make it 3, and then every outcome have 3 measures that are a bit counter to each other, as you say, to counter each other, to say, okay, if we go into this direction, let's also look at that. And then there are a few nice things of, for example, make them measurable and don't say, and that is where Kanbanize also comes in quite nicely, because they have it like that. Don't say, I want to increase my sales by 5%, but say, I want to increase my sales from 100,000 to 105,000, because that makes the measurement a lot more. Or I want to have 3 new clients. So from 10 clients to 13 clients, or whatsoever. It just gives it that measurement where you say, okay, this is where I'm now, this is where I'm going, and it gives it a percentage is fuzzy.
Mm-hmm. And so following the technique of SMART metrics, we have to be clear about the pertinence and the simplicity and the timeliness of the metrics that we're putting in place.
Mm-hmm. Yes, in my experience, another very common error when you start using OKRs is to use OKRs as a to-do list to describe a plan. So you can recognize KR as something like milestones or work package, and it's not so easy to make this change, because it's a cultural change. You need to evolve a management culture based on outcome instead of based on putting things in the done column of Kanbanize. It's great to put something in done, but then you can only describe objective in terms of a list of things to do, and this is wrong. You're going to measure the effort and not the value. So this is very important. Changing this, yes, it's nice to measure the effort, but we need to measure the value. Absolutely. So I'm curious about the poll. I make a forecast in the maybe in the first the top 5 that is using OKRs as a to-do list. Do you have the results, Veronica?
We do have the answers. I am going to read some of them out loud. Let's see. Sometimes precise measure is impossible. Measuring outcomes versus tasks. Whilst the organization love objectives, setting how to transition from milestone-based tracking to proper OKRs. Objectives are realist. Define good key results. Change management as people feel someone is moving their cheese. There was a very good kickoff, but then nobody followed up on the OKRs. Making the key results truly measurable is a challenge. Confusion on OKRs, KPIs, OGSM, EBM, etc. Key results are represented by milestones. When a metric goes as OKR, and when does a metric go as an OKR, and when is it a KPI? And how to embed OKRs across cross-disciplinary teams in large organizations. So there's quite a bit there.
Yeah, I think I want to latch onto one of them, is this set and forget. What a lot of people do, we once a year do our strategy like we did it previously. We set that, and then we forget it, or we start for a year, we measure this. And then OKRs are definitely not agile. because you're not reviewing. You need to check regularly, you need to review, and OKRs is a big thing that is coming in, is they are living with the company. They are an outcome, and outcomes change. And also the whole thing, and that's where the big thing comes in with the cadences, that you really need to review the whole time. And a lot of these things come in, you set the wrong measure. That's okay if you review it regularly, because you very quickly will find out it's the wrong measure. Like what Robert said, I mean, if we put the measure, and we might in the best intention have that and said these 3 minutes, and I mean, this was now a very obvious example to us, but there are others where you find out after a month, this was absolutely the wrong measure. Great. Another way of the measurement that doesn't work. It's a bit of Edison with his 2,000 ways to find how a light bulb doesn't work until he found the one that worked. It is a bit of that, because every company is different. We react differently, and we can't predict how people will react to the measure.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that another issue that I've seen very frequently in organizations when it comes to measuring how they do their work. They had, this day and age, we always have software tools that we use for management purposes. And what I've seen in many organizations is they'll say, they get asked the question, well, how are we going to measure it? How are we going to decide if we're achieving the outcomes we want to achieve? And the answer they come up with is, well, we'll use the measurements that are provided by the tool. After all, they're the experts in this domain, so let's benefit from their expertise. And when I hear that, I just feel like crying, because the only experts in your company are you. You're the experts in your company, not the people who made the tools that you're using. And if you try to get shortcuts to finding what's important in your organization to achieve your organization goals, with your organization's personnel and your structure, you're just giving up in advance. So something that's, I think, is very important to avoid.
Anything else to add?
For sure, when we talk about OKR, we share a metaphor. The metaphor is the metaphor of the bridge. We used to say that OKR are the bridge between strategy and execution. As Mathias was saying, strategy changes over the time, and you need something that is so dynamic that helps you to align not only people, but really execution to strategy. Otherwise, you find yourself using OKR in the wrong way. You can certainly use OKR in the wrong way. The problem is that sometimes you discover it when it's too late, because really it's not so difficult starting with OKR, but you need to put the effort on the right question. When you work with OKR, you need the right question to work with. It's the most difficult thing to do, changing the question that you share with the others. Because everyone talks about project deadlines, ownership, but when you start talking about success, how to measure success, the way you identify success gives you a hint about what to measure. If you don't ask yourself something related to success, you can find the right way to measure it. So everything is interconnected.
And this comes back again to the timeliness of the measurements that you make. You need to have a scope over which you make the measurements, a scope of time over which you make the measurements that is not too long, because if it's too long, you lose the agility function. But on the other hand, not too short, because then your data sample is probably not significant enough. And this is something you learn by trying and doing, seeing what works, what is the right span of time that gives you the ability to adjust as you get feedback, and also gives you feedback that allows you to make good understanding of what are the issues you're trying to address. So,
Robert, just one addition to that timeline is also, it's not the same everywhere in the company. You might set your strategy once a year and just review that slightly over the year and have a quarterly business review or something like that. But on the team level, you might look at it monthly, or you should look at it monthly. And you should really weekly look at your targets. And whenever you do a replenishment, you need to look at and say, what is it that I should be doing next that moves the needle, especially in change projects and things like that. You really need to say that. And does it make sense still? You need to review that, because if my previous project's outcome invalidated the previous key result or an or an objective, then I need to move that up into the company and say this is no longer applicable.
It depends very much at the team level. It depends very much on what are the typical cycle times for the various types of work the team is doing, and adjusting the scale of your measurement to those cycle times.
Veronica, one more muted.
No, okay. We're good. We do have one question that has been asked in the Q&A. If you, speaking to the audience here, have a question that you would like to ask to our panel, don't miss on this opportunity and submit your question in the Q&A. I'm also sharing the Kanbanize LinkedIn page to make sure that you never have to miss a webinar ever again. So please follow us. And now to the queue. We have Adriel Moro asking, in which sense are OKRs different from the BSC structure, which I assume is a balanced scorecard? At BSC, we already had the same concept of objectives and metrics to monitor them. The main difference I see is that BSC tries to fit the objectives in 4 perspectives and establish a kind of cause-effect relationship between the objectives. How do you understand that?
I think if I can come there in from having had quite a bit of experience on both sides of BSC. We've had it implemented in the 90s in our previous company. We implemented business scorecarding. And the big thing is it is very heavy versus OKRs, because it has got these specific 4 layers, and we've spent hours literally in strategy sessions to get all those lines down and what are the 4 levels and what goes down and what comes out at the bottom, and then doing that on every level of the company. And in the end, you come out with those 5 or 6 things that everybody is measured on and has to get a green tick. And a lot of these tools were like that. And even the biggest problem is also a lot of performance measurement was run like that. And in my previous life, I was more in the IT industry, and we were a partner of Microsoft. And I still remember, because I was the partner manager for our company, the first thing I asked every semester to the Microsoft rep we had, what are your 5 tick marks? Because I knew if I don't help them to achieve their tick mark, I don't get anything done. And if I can bend whatever I want into those 5 tick marks, then I get what I want, because they can make it green. But it forgets totally what was actually the outcome they had, because it is cascaded down to this is something, and now you can shoehorn anything into it. And that was my biggest problem with business scorecarding, is that it becomes so fractured that you forget, or you totally lose the picture of what is at the top, what was actually, and the intention was good, and it's the same intention as OKR. I see very much parallels, but the implementation is really, really difficult often. That's my feeling and my experience of business scorecarding of both sides.
I think there's a tendency from what I've seen in organizations that use the scorecard, balanced scorecard approach. There's a tendency to be very much a top-down sort of approach. After all, when Kaplan and Norton first started to articulate the concept, they were talking about using it for defining and implementing corporate strategy. And what we can do, and this is not limited to OKRs, but what we can do is think more in terms of alignment of the different entities in the organization each of which is influencing the other. So what we decide at the highest organizational corporate level will need to be adjusted in terms of what the teams are doing, talking to the teams and what they're able to achieve, talking to the department heads, talking to what they're able to achieve, who their customers are, what their output is going to, and how they need to measure that, and then align, relate them at different levels. So it's just as much middle out, bottom up as top down. And balanced scorecard tends to be more top down, in my experience.
I think, Gianluca, would you like to add?
No, I think that I have not so much experience with the business scorecard. So in the 90s, Mathias, I was at high school maybe or something like that.
Sorry.
You are more experienced than me. I appreciate your answer, really. There's always something to learn.
Okay. We have one more question asked by Scott Busiek. What resources, books, articles would you recommend on OKRs and defining outcomes within an organization outside of the amazing content provided by Kanbanize? Thank you, Scott, for acknowledging that we do provide resources.
I think OKRs these days is so sexy. Just type it into Google and you'll find hundreds literally of hits, and Google is also ranking quite well. So whatever people like and whatever people do look at a lot, and the same thing with YouTube, that will bubble up to the top. So that's the easiest. And today, this thing, I mean, there are a few things like you can look at Andy Grove's original book or John Doerr's original book from 1983 and 1999, but there's so much content now that is being generated every week on this, because it is, and especially Andy Grove was looking at that we had only waterfall. So his execution was waterfall by default. Whereas now we're looking at how do we fit it into Agile? How do we fit it into Kanban? How do we fit it? And there's such amazing content out there. And also a lot of it in small snippets in webinars, in short videos on YouTube, in articles that take you 15 minutes to read, and of different concepts. What's the HR part of this? What's the whole culture change part of it? How do you do it? How do you set them? Then there's whole ebooks on examples of what are good and what are bad KRs. How do you set them? So there's so much out there. Yes, there are a few, and the Kanbanize, I would send you to the book list. There's a top 10 book list they've got at the end. That's the typical default books that you've got, the Beginner's Guide to OKR and John Doerr's book and Andy Grove's book and so on. But I would rather go to Google these days and say, what tickles my fancy? What's my problem at the moment?
Yes. And there is also many good contents, or audio contents on Audible or Spotify.
Mm.
Check these.
If I may just allow myself to kind of contribute further to this question, how would you rate the trial and error experience of failing at setting good OKRs versus reading about OKRs? Would it be, how do you advise someone who is worried, or a company or a team that is worried about getting their feet wet with OKRs because of confusion or whatever it may be?
Whenever you set an OKR, it will be wrong, the first one. If you do it now, or if you read every book that's out there.
And it's not so easy to find good examples, because, it's tricky sharing examples about OKR, because the way you work with OKR is really related to your context. So you need to try yourself, and as it's the best way to understand your context, how to do it. Because if you spend too much time trying to find the correct examples, you can risk to try to replicate it, and it's not a good way to apply OKRs. So, but it's a fascinating story. There are a few books that share stories that are good to be inspired more than to learn about them. It's a good inspiration reading a lot of books about OKR, but for what concerns example, our suggestion is do it yourself, try with your colleagues. Because the great thing of OKR is that my OKR I can share with you, and you can give me feedback about my OKR. So it's always a dialogue between peers, and it's the best way to approach it.
So we can say, don't do it alone.
Feedback is key.
I think any author of any business book that talks about experiences and shares them ought to be forced to write at the very beginning, this is what we did. Don't even think about trying to do it in your organization. And in any case, if we were to do it today, we wouldn't do the same thing either. That's our experience. If you try to replicate our experience, you will definitely fail. So find your own experience.
I think it's a bit like it's always the thing that's being cited in the Agile community, the Spotify model. And everybody who implemented the Spotify model, but Spotify wasn't using the Spotify model by that time anyway.
Exactly.
We do have one more question that I want us to target before we break off. Joseph asks you guys, how do we move from a milestone-based track of progress to a proper key results as defined in the rulebook of OKRs?
Yes. Short answer, asking why you did this milestone, why there is a working package in your backlog. There is a culture shift. So it's long, it's not easy, but if I can get a very, very short answer in 140 characters, is starting asking the why.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing. The other thing is it actually starts in the O. It's the outcome. If you start defining outcomes and not goals, you start measuring them, and you always need to ask, what's my outcome? What do I want to achieve? And I like that, David, that you say why. What do I want to achieve, and why do I want to achieve it? But what's the outcome? Not what's the next thing I need to do, or what is it that we think, and we always call it a hidden solution. There shouldn't be a hidden solution in there. As I said earlier on, you shouldn't say I need to employ somebody, but it's what's the outcome I want to achieve, and an action might be I need to employ somebody. And it's not easy. It's not something that I can say you this is an outcome and this is not an outcome. It depends on your situation. But it is something, for example, employing somebody. If we have got a CEO that is going to retire in 3 years' time, employing somebody is an outcome. We need to find the next CEO. But there's loads of other key results that come in between, and lots of other objectives. But the outcome in the end might be that. So it's not. But if I say employing another salesperson, that's definitely not an outcome. That's an action.
This whole question of comparing achieving milestones as opposed to achieving outcomes reminds me of an example that a colleague of mine gave. He said, if you take an airplane, a modern airplane that can fly 10,000 kilometers London to Japan. And you know, the navigation equipment we have today is so precise and so accurate. There is such a small amount of error that with only a 0.001% error, you'll miss the runway in Tokyo by only 100 meters. You need to not plan every detail in advance and strictly follow the plan, because you're going to miss the runway, maybe by a little, maybe by a lot, but you can be sure you're going to miss it. So you need to check periodically where you are, adjust your course, change your attitude, change what you're doing, and that way you'll be much more assured of reaching the outcome, landing safely. So I wish a bon voyage to everyone.
Yes, unfortunately, we are all out of time. As I mentioned earlier, please make sure you follow us on LinkedIn so that you never have to miss an event like this. The recording will be made available, so rest assured. Thank you to our expert table for your time that you have so graciously given us to teach us from your experience. This has been wonderful, and it's been such a pleasure hosting you. And as I always forget to do this time I've vowed that I will not. Can we please take a screenshot?
Sure.
Take a picture of a virtual picture. Ready? Everyone ready? 1, 2, 3. Oh, 1 second. Here we go. Perfect. Thank you. I'm the annoying person with the pictures. Thank you so much.
Thanks for hosting us, Veronica.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Of course. It's been my pleasure as well.
Thanks, Veronica.
Thank you very much. Thanks for organizing. Thanks for all the great work.
Fill out our survey. We can host more of these. If this has been helpful to you, please fill out the survey at the end of this meeting. Bye, everyone. Have an awesome day.
Take
Bye.
care.